What scares you the most that I'm going to ask you?
What scares me the most?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Oh, good.
Anything that's going to scare me. If you're scared of things that people are going to ask you, you have things that you haven't dealt with, or you have things you shouldn't have done. I don't have any of that.
So for people that are young listening to this that don't know those days, what was Hyperfactory?
The main driver behind building that company was not what we were doing, it was to show that it could be done. To say, how can a few kids in a balcony in Anzac Avenue create a global business?
What is there for people that don't know?
I was looking at the whole financial system and the way houses are bought or not bought, and I was looking for any different way that we could unlock the system to help people buy their first home faster.
And how are you going to do it?
What we've realized is...
To the CTO role that you applied for, right? And I think the NZ tech ecosystem thought that there was some back-end things happening behind the scenes.
That is so ridiculous. I don't even know if there's any point in responding to that.
I mean, disappointing that role didn't get filled, regardless, right?
Yes, but I think New Zealand tech kind of only has itself to blame.
Yeah.
Because...
Hey everyone, welcome back to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with Derek Handley. You might know Derek from the original Hyperfactory days, where he was building cool shit for phones before there was even iPhones. So we go deep in talking about this story. You might know him from his second startup, Snack. You might know him from the government CTO role that he was never appointed in and was appointed in and then didn't take and didn't get. And there was some controversy around that we discuss on this episode. Or you might know the man now who is a director on the boards. He is the Era VC. He is Era FinTech, which is basically a whole new way to be able to buy houses and help people buy houses, get funding, almost like a bank. And so it's a super interesting conversation, this one. We try to cover as much as humanly possible, but we definitely miss out on elements because an hour is just not long enough to talk to a guy like this. And so I hope you enjoy the highlights of this hour. Stay tuned.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning in to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
How do you feel about being like one of the OGs of the industry that now, man? Because like you guys were like early startup, right? Like Hyperfactory, it's come up a lot, right, in conversations recently. And I'm like, every time I hear it, I'm like, yeah, man, they're like the OGs, right? Like when there was fucking Nokia phones, right?
Yeah, there was nothing. I feel vindicated because the main driver behind building that company was not what we were doing. It was to show that it could be done.
Yeah.
And that's what motivated me more than anything, to say, how can a few basically kids in a balcony in Anzac Avenue create a global business? And from day one, we never wanted to create a New Zealand business. And so there was no roadmap, there was no infrastructure, there's no patterns to follow. And the whole idea was, can you show that it could be done? Now, we didn't do it in anywhere of the scale or the perfection or the beauty that's being done now. Like, it's just awesome to watch what people are doing now. But to show that, you know, we were one of the first to just tread a path where there was none, it just makes me super proud to see all the people following and doing it, you know, 100 times better.
I've met so many people, man, that were in that sort of world, right? Like so many people spread out through the industry, right?
Yeah.
How old were you then?
Started like 22. Yeah.
So go back to 22-year-old you, right? Why do you want to build a company like that?
Well, I mean, during university, I thought I was doing architecture and was doing finance, and I thought, well, I could get a job, but I really want to build something. So I kind of went down both paths. I applied, I got a job, and then I was like, I need to build something. But it was also a bit of disappointment that I'd missed a boom because the .com thing had imploded, and I was like, oh, shit, what am I going to do now? But there was always in my DNA to build something. You know, my father had businesses, and I always thought, I'm going to build something, don't know what it is. And learning that whole craft, I very much had the philosophy that at that age, you can make all the mistakes and you still have a whole life ahead of you. Yeah. You know, so...
Yeah. Let's get play and let's get risk to lose at that
age.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I still think that's true. I think you can take less risks and different kinds of risks as you get older. But when you're straight out of university,
Yeah. So what was the idea in your head? Like, what did you guys think that you're going to build? Did you know exactly what you wanted to build, or?
No, I'm kind of methodological. I kind of map different areas, different problems, and I kind of create like finalists. Like, what are the categories that are going to change the most? What are the industries that are going to change the most? Because when you don't know anything, you don't have any experience, you don't have any skills, you kind of have to choose a wave to bet on. And that's how we developed, okay, mobile is going to be this massive transition from the web to a new device. And
But that was early though, man. Like, how did you see mobile transitioning so quickly?
I think there was enough indications that, well, because if you're in Japan in those days, you would see that they were using the phone as a much more sophisticated tool, right? They had internet and things on the phone in those days. So you could see that if they got the form factor different, if they sold a few things, that this would become the remote control to your life. So then it would be a question about, well, what role are you going to play, and can you last long enough to be a part of that wave? And to be honest, we almost didn't last so many different times until the iPhone came, because no one really understood it until the iPhone came. They then understood, oh, this is what's possible. So in the meantime, we were just doing everything and anything we could with text and mobile web, which was horrifically, terrible user experience. The web. Text was awesome. You still do so many amazing things with text. Obviously, still people do.
Johnny used to work for Run the Red back in the day.
Oh, really?
So,
yeah. Exactly. So there's amazing things you can do. And I was just paying my parking with the AT app. And that was one of the first things we said you could pay you should be able to pay by text. And we pioneered all those kinds of things. So you just have a North Star, where things are changing, then you just got to build on top of it. That's kind of how I see things.
So for people that are young listening to this, that know you as the director guy and, founding a startup now, that don't know those days, like what was that company? What was Hyperfactory?
It basically was a company that helped other companies, which eventually became all the biggest brands in the world, make that move from what was a PC world to a mobile world. So we transitioned all of their content, their assets, their campaigns, their ads, and made them able to be delivered on mobile. And that had never happened before. Like, we had done everything we did. We also wanted to break a new ground every year, which we did for every year for 10 years in a row. So, for example, for Toyota, we did campaigns in California where you're on the web, you'd do some configuration of the car, and then you'd send a link to a Google Map direction to the dealer that was closest to you, to your phone, which obviously today's obvious, but back then that was the first time anyone had ever done that. And in New Zealand, we did a lot of world first, like the first time you could text to the radio station to interact with the VJs, or text to the television to vote. We built all of those platforms. So we evolved all of that all the way through to, well, what does an iPhone or an iPad do for a brand, and how does that work? And then how do ad units participate, which obviously is kind of like the bane of my life now, because it's like, well, you played a role in the stuff that you really hate now, especially when you have young kids. You're like, there's this crazy amount of mobile ads that are destroying their brains.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is the problem, right? When we're all creating these things and hopefully they're for the good, but some of them definitely aren't so much.
Yeah.
How do you do that from New Zealand though, man? Because you guys took on the stage globally really quickly, right? You guys were in New York, you were everywhere. And so how do you, as Kiwis, get away with this?
Well, just by sheer dumb ignorance, just going and saying you're going to try and do something, and you come from the bottom of the world. But we also had this idea that New Zealand would be this kind of intermediary, a workflow manager, so that the office in New Zealand would manage all the work that was coming around the world. And then we had a development center in India, up to 100 developers at one point, which would then produce the work. And then the client offices would kind of localize it and make sure that it was going to work. And of course you had to test it, because you had to test the shit out of everything. And in those days you had a million different networks. They wouldn't even talk to each other. Every different phone had to have different content in different format. It was wildly different. So if you created one website or one site for mobiles, we'd have to create thousands of versions. So we built a machine that would then automatically detect the phone and deliver it up, so that every different phone had a different version to fit their screen size and their browser. I mean, can you imagine how wildly, we called that platform the Godfather, because it was essentially the engine that orchestrated everything. And so we had this theory that you can pop up these client and sales offices, funnel it all back to New Zealand 24/7, and then get it delivered it from India. And so all you had to do was show up in the markets and get people to believe you. And that was the fun part. Right. And having not an American accent helps, because every American thinks you're really intelligent if you don't have an American accent.
Oh, really? Yeah. You got away with just having a cheeky Kiwi humour and accent.
Yeah, and they think you're smart.
Talk me through the first big meeting that you're in the States. Like, talk me through the before and after.
Oh, well, the first big meeting was actually in Parnell at Saatchi & Saatchi, because we had done a deal with Kevin Roberts, who was the CEO at that time of Saatchi, and we said, you guys are the guardians of the brands all around the world, and their world is going to change. And we are this kind of 8-person shop that's really specialist in how you understand mobile as a medium. So why don't you, an 8,000-person shop, partner with us, an 8-person shop, and we'll put people in all your offices to help these massive brands figure out how to transition. That was a 15-minute pitch to Kevin that we'd got a meeting through a very tenuous friend of a friend of a friend. And he said, you've got 15 minutes, boys, to me and my brother. And we had this kind of massive A3 fold-out presentation that we just walked him through 10 pictures, and on the last picture was an iPod in the back of a jeans pocket of a young lady, and we'd put iPhone, and there was never such an iPhone at that point.
So you named it before.
We said to really drill it home to him to go, okay, I think I see where this is going. And so in that deal, in that meeting, he basically said, I get it, I believe you. You have the right to walk into any office and set up shop. And so I, within a month, I'd moved to New York with a credit card, $10,000, small suitcase, and they laid out the red carpet. I had an office at Saatchi, and then I started pounding through all the different clients. And the first one I remember was Johnson & Johnson. There was a brand called Tylenol, which is for your headache. Mm-hmm. They'd sponsored the World Cup. They had all these digital assets. And I said, we could create a whole set of mobile content for your community, Hispanic community this was. And the deal was like $100,000 US. And that would have been like 20 different New Zealand projects. And that was all done within 60 days.
That's crazy. And was it purely from the support that you had with Saatchi as well to help with redlining and everything, or did you do it all yourself?
No, we had to do it all ourselves, other than, we got in the door and we had a space. Yeah. But at that point, you've got to set up everything yourself, build your own team and, your own company and generate the revenue. Yeah. Was that
the moment, like moving to New York, that you were like, oh shit, we've got something here?
Yeah, it was definitely like, okay, we have to do this. Yeah. That's why within a month I'd moved, because I hadn't sort of thought about any of it. Like, I hadn't thought about visas or where to live or anything. We'd agreed that I would have $10,000 in 90 days. That was kind of the idea. Yeah. And then if I could make something work, then I'd earn the right to stay. Yeah. But obviously, when you're in America, it's unlike any other market because of the money. It's just so big. Yeah. It's just enormous. Yeah.
Do you think more startups should get in the US as soon as they can?
If there's something that they can offer, I was talking to someone this morning about that. Oh, Lisa King from AF Drinks. It's like she's saying there's more and more people when she goes to New York. There's more Kiwis that are founding companies, and I think I literally said to her this morning, that really makes me happy because it was just us for years and years. It was literally just us, and learning to navigate that whole city. There's a song about it, right? If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. So it's extremely daunting.
New York every day asks you, do you really want to be here?
Absolutely.
Right?
It spits people out constantly, but also people decide this is not for me because it's super intense, especially in that age group, like 20 to 35, like when you need to make progress in that city. Yeah. You can't be stagnant because also it's really expensive. So it'll eat you alive.
What did New York teach you as a person, though, like working in this business network of New York? Like, is that's the heyday, even though the ad agencies and the creatives, and New York was, and probably still is, the mecca of that world, right? Like, what did that teach you as a person?
Well, it taught me that you can, fit it with the best, like that you are able to compete and sit at the table of the world's best. And of course, as a company builder from Auckland, that was our idea. Can we be the world's best at what we want to do? It was never anything less. Like all other kinds of failures could have occurred, even financially. But in terms of what we were trying to do, it was global from day one and the world's best. Mm-hmm. And that's when we started to knock up that recognition. Then we realized, that's amazing. Because if you can compete in that market, because New York's not just New York, it's obviously the whole of America.
Yeah.
But even those days, New York tech scene was not a big deal either. Now it's exploded.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the home of venture.
Admin, right?
Oh, it was ad, media.
Mm-hmm.
There was some tech, but now there's enormous numbers of tech startups. So if you tech startup, you needed to go to California to raise your VC and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's all changed.
Yeah, man. There's a massive Kiwi community now. Like back then, it would have just been like you and Guy, maybe.
Guy came after us.
Yeah.
I met a couple of people who were working in New York. There was obviously Mark Darcy. He was at Time Warner.
Yeah.
The Facebook, Google crew, Kristen and Craig Neville Manning. And there was a guy in the Saatchi agency that was a Kiwi, but it was few and far between. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Shit, yeah. And so what do you, when you look back on Hyperfactory, man, like what do you remember the most, and like what was the moment that really brings you joy, and then what are the lessons and the hard fucking moments that you're like, oh shit, that was the tough times?
Well, the joy is just the culture that we built, really. Like I haven't built a culture like that again, and I've met lots of people that were there in those 4 or 5 years that were amazing, that it's like a thing you can't get back. And I have friends around the world that are like, it's just nothing has ever matched that period of time.
Chasing the dragon of that culture, right?
Yeah, and it's like...
What was it? What was the uniqueness of it?
I don't know, but it was just, we had an amazing bunch of people that were just willing to and wanted to, because it was so much fun, just take it on, take all the challenges on and create the future. And it was just exciting, and it was painful. Yeah, there may be part of it.
I talk to people about culture a lot as a recruiter, right? They're always telling me this is their culture, and I'm like, oh, well, like everyone says that, and so, but I do definitively think people of a certain age, younger age, right? It's the first time, you're young enough and naive enough to think that you can definitely change the world, and you believe it, right? And if you have a group of friends around you that all believe it, you're fucking unstoppable, man. You can do whatever the hell you want, right?
Yeah. And
so that's the first time that you just have no boundaries in life, and you can just go after it. And then unfortunately or fortunately, you sort of hit some walls, and then you realize what capabilities and your limits are. And then the second time you're like, oh, I'll probably never get that same culture back again, but maybe it's just the mind frame.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's also you're growing really fast as a person. So if you're mid-20s and you're in a company that's doing new things every day, you're growing a lot. And part of it's, we always had a lot of fun, like constantly. So I think that's changed a lot. How much fun you allow people to have now. I think some of that's good. We just took really, really good care of all the people and constantly doing, interesting, fun things. And in that first burst when you're younger, it's really, really exciting. But then as you get older, you have kids, your family, other things become much more important, as they should. But often in that window, that community is the most important thing in your life, because it's where you're making your friends, it's where you're spending almost all your time, it's where you're growing the most. And if you're proud of the work, it's where you get a lot of your pride, and the meaning of what you're doing day to day.
Did you have moments where you were worried you were going to lose it all? And
how many? So many to count. Yeah. Definitely so many times. Obviously in the Great Recession, that was extremely traumatic. Definitely lost a lot of people. Half the size of the company.
What was the height you guys got to?
Number, 180.
Yeah.
So we turned it to 80 after recession, pretty much in 3 months. But many times, almost out of money. I had to get bridge finance several times.
Yeah.
Just the kind of stress that is next level, especially when you think it's the most important thing in your world. Whereas now I don't think anything could, stress me like that other than people's health. And so it means as a second time or third time or fourth time founder, nothing actually can phase you, because you get the picture of what's important and what's not important in life, and everything has a level of importance. But also a lot of things can be solved.
But how do you learn that though, right? Because there's a lot of people, especially in this market right now, that are like, I've only known the good 3 years.
I don't think you can learn it without being through it, to be honest, unless you're some sort of Zen, monk. My favorite saying was, and still is kind of in a lot of ways, it is what it is. Like, you have to look at things and see them for what they are. You have to remove the judgment and move forward. You have to make decisions with really cool heads, and you have to make the decisions that you feel in your gut are right, but you take a very long time to do, which I think a lot of founders do, because it's a lot of other stuff tied up in it, which is more like ego, emotions, other things. And so, but when you've been through the few times, you can kind of sense those signals much faster, and you just make the decisions much more coolly. And in the end, you have to do them in a way that you know, actually, this is the best thing, not just for you, not just for the company, but also for the other people involved. And so when I learned how to do that, to make decisions like that and believe this is the best thing for all of us, then you kind of walk through them with more grace, I suppose.
Did you have mentors early on?
We did, but not in the way that they had walked the path, you know? So we had some investment, you know, there were some angels around those days. We had the 42 Below guys invest in us, and they had done really gutsy stuff. So that was incredible to have them in our corner and help us navigate things. They didn't really know much about the business, but they knew about risks and people. But really, you're kind of making it up, you know. Well, at least we were, yeah.
What learnings do you think sort of did you take away the most from that time?
I think there's a few things. One is like, you know, you put your mind to something and you really, really commit to it. It takes a lot of work, but you can achieve outsized things, right? The second kind of thing is more the flip side. It's like none of it is as important as you think it is.
Yeah.
You know?
Hard to tell yourself that in the moment though, right?
Yes, but it changes quickly. I think a lot of people, when they sell a company, they realize, oh, that was that.
Did you go through a grief period when you sold?
Not really. I was more relieved because, as I said, I just wanted to show that it could be done. And if I couldn't successfully close the loop, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Yeah. So if the company died, or if it folded, or if it spluttered along, if it didn't have some sort of closure, I think it would have caused me it would have caused other issues. Yeah. And I remember reading in the Herald of the day of the first sale, the 20%, and I cried, and it wasn't a crying out of like, this was in Tribeca in our apartment, it wasn't a crying of elation, it was really a crying of relief. Like, oh, that's done.
Who are you? You said, you keep saying trying to show, right? I'm trying to show. Who are you trying to show?
People that were the next generation that were going to build companies.
Yeah. Did you feel pressure?
Only the pressure I put on myself. No one cared about what we were doing, in the sense that no one was going to cut you down if you didn't achieve this outrageous idea. The bigger you build the brand, the bigger you build the expectation, the higher profile you build. So we were constantly telling stories, constantly in the media, constantly trying to showcase this is what we're trying to do. The more you do that, the more pressure there is externally. That part is not as good, but it comes with the territory.
Interesting you say stories, right? Like, so when I ask people about you, like whenever I'm podcasting, you know, and having a guest on, I always ask whoever I'm chatting to at the time, what are your thoughts on what questions? Tell me about, you know, stories. What do you know? Unanimously, when I asked about you, everyone was like, man, what a great storyteller. You know, like what a great...
That's kind.
And like a few times, even the one earlier today with Jono, someone was talking about you pitching at an event recently and having limited information on your pitch deck and just having like emojis or something, right? But just being able to just like captivate people with the story and have a slide to point to and then captivate. And I think like for me, storytelling is everything, right? If you can unlock storytelling and not have people read your pitch deck while you're trying to get important information out, right?
Yeah, I've always loved storytelling. It's one of the things, like, I think it's like when I get old, I'm going to be a great storyteller. Like, it's really one of the things I want to do, like write books or things like that. I love the idea of how do you display information differently. And I went to, you know, I spent time at design school, architecture school. So you kind of have to think about different ways to think about how you tell visual stories. What are the metaphors you're using? I definitely still feel like grasshopper in terms of this art, but I think there's so much you can do. As a venture investor, as a VC, obviously we have a fund and thousands of pitches every year, and I think it's a really massive shame how many great, amazing founders are not getting funded in the world because they're doing such a terrible job of their storytelling. And because we're a mostly deep tech investor, I think it's much worse in that category. And those are the kind of founders that want to compress everything into the presentation, and all the slides contain all the information. And they're not thinking about the different various versions of a presentation. So if you have a pitch night and you're presenting in that example you mentioned, it's 500 people in a room and 300 people on Zoom. if you think about 500 people in a room, well, there's a whole bunch of them that are in the back of the room. They're not going to read anything. They're not going to be able to see anything properly. A lot of them not going to have that great eyesight. So you have to think about the context, which is a totally different presentation than if you are sending someone a reading deck, which is after they've had the pitch and you're sending them something to read, which has got more granularity, which you might have some more text, which is totally different from like a memo, like a memo PowerPoint. And as you get later stage, the PowerPoints that get sent over are much more complex, but that's not the one they present.
Yeah.
That's the one that's convincing you in all the metrics that they're achieving at Series B or C.
Can you learn storytelling?
I think you can. I think there are people that are now starting to realize that this is a powerful place to help train founders. There's a guy called Robbie Crabtree who he's the only person I can see out there on the internet who's trying to help people become better storytellers to raise money. There's some other guys on LinkedIn. There's a guy that used to be a researcher for Ryan Holiday, who's a writer, and he's got a whole feed on his channel around how to tell better stories.
Yeah, there's a good Welsh Kiwi guy, DK, if you ever come across him. He's good. Like, he was really good in that sort of ecosystem as well. But I think, like, I'm with you, right? Like, because as a startup recruiter, everyone pitches me their idea and, look, I'm going to hire 100 people, and I go, all right, and they send stuff to me and I'm like, man, this is... like, it's just like reading a book and you don't even have a product yet, like, tell me what the story is, And so I think I always tell people, when you get to the stage and you've got something, you've got a company, right, you need to start rehearsing that story. And so, like, apply for awards, even if you think you're not going to get it, just so that you can start like creating the narrative and having like a really good story ready that you can start talking to people about. And so, yeah, man, interesting. Hey, we talked on mentors before. Obviously, you met a really amazing guy, Richard Branson, that we were chatting about before the show. How did you meet him? Like, talk to me about that.
I've told this story a lot of times, but I'll tell it again. So first thing I did when the company acquired 20% of us was we bought a house, bought a letter from Napoleon, which was another thing about stories, and put down money to go on the Virgin Galactic space thing. This is a long time ago. I still haven't gone. And so there were some events for that community, if there was only a few hundred at the time in the world. And I met him through that. That was the initial, time that we first met. I was a few times earlier, but never really created a connection or had the chance to chat to him. But this moment, I decided it would be different, and I would present him some ideas, and then I'd committed again. It was kind of like in your mind. I was like, I'm going to do something that is going to enable me to work with Richard, not like work for him or not take a selfie. Yeah. And so I'd gone into that meeting and that occasion with a different mindset than the previous ones, which was more of awe and, I just want to meet him and shake a hand and, because I'd been reading the book since I was a kid kind of thing. So again, it shows you like your mindset, super important, and it can change every situation that you're in.
Yeah. So were you reading like books before you started like founding? Like, were you like in the thinking of creating this company before you started, or was it during the process of like founding a company that you started getting more and reading more books?
I was reading a lot of books as a high school kid, not so much at uni, but they were more just general business bios. So you're talking about like the Packers and Murdochs and Bransons and those kind of things, because that's what the books were. Yeah. It's not really a lot of startup books in those days.
But Richard's was a good startup book.
Yes, but it covers like so many years. Yeah. So Losing My Virginity basically goes from the beginning, student magazine, all the way through to the airlines and stuff. But, in a book and you're covering 30 years, you're skipping over the grind, which is the reason why I wrote my book. Because I was like, there's no book that actually is the grind. Yeah. And I knew that I would forget all the bits of the grind. And sometimes I pick the book up and I look at it, I'm like, I've totally forgot that even happened. Yeah. So I committed. I was like, I'm going to write a book largely about the grind. And so it's one book, but it only covers largely it's about 5 years. So, and I knew I had to do it quickly. Yeah. Otherwise, I'd just forget all the little bits, forget even the people, because you don't see them again. You're in this world and then you just move on.
What's the one thing that you hope people will take out of your book?
That they feel that if they're compelled to build or create something, it doesn't need to be a startup, it could be anything, that they should take action. Like that the stakes are too high to not pursue something you believe in, and to not leave something you don't care about, some sort of a day job or some sort of career that you shouldn't be in, because that's really the main theme. That's why it's called Heart to Start, because it's about unlocking what's in the heart and moving on and starting towards where you believe you should go. It doesn't mean you're going to win or succeed, but life is not about playing it safe. It's about making sure that what's inside of you has a chance to come out.
Does everyone have that ability to take that first step though?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do in the book, and that's why it's actually subtitled "And a Guide to Turning Your Ideas into Action," because there's a whole middle section, which is different color pages, which is all about how do you break down a vision or an idea, and how do you take action to break it down into steps that you might be able to turn it into something. I think everyone has the ability to do that. It doesn't need to be some giant scale effort or vision or endeavor. It could be anything. I
think so many people I speak to someone, just taking that first step scares the absolute shit out of them, because it's like everything I've got to lose is over here, and I'm taking a step away from that to potentially nothing, right? And as the older you get, the more things over there to lose, like they're more prominent, right? And so
yeah, but it is going back to like it is what it is. You kind of like lay out what it is now, lay out what the risks could be if you're really worried about them, kind of box them in like, okay, I'll do this for 6 months, or I've saved up this much money to do this, or I'll do it after hours or something. Go through the process and then make decisions at each point. But it's ridiculous to think you can't go back. Like any career that you step out for a year, if you can't go back, you're either a liar or you're no good. Because why are you so bad that you can't step out to try something and then come back again? Yes, you might have to go backwards. Yes, you might not have got the job, the promotion that you wanted next year. You might not get it if you go and build something and it doesn't work and you come back in 3 years. You might have to take a more junior job than all your peers previously. But that's not going back. That's going forwards, because you've gone and you've grown and you've evolved. And that's kind of the whole mantra of my, I guess, whole life has been this constant evolution of taking new risks and going into new territories and learning all over again. And there's definitely, man, there was lots of far easier ways I could have built this life, but this is what I've chosen. I've always chosen really difficult things. And sometimes I do want to punch myself in the face, because it doesn't make it easy for my family or my son, or it's always just hard.
but you're going to lie in your deathbed one day and not regret anything, right? And that's like, well, you may regret time or whatever it is, like family, but that for me, like I'm always inspired. I love chatting with people who are just going after it. I don't care what you're going after, right? You could be creating I don't know, tiddlywinks over here at League, and I'm like, fucking, I'm in your corner supporting you, right? Whatever it is, but life's short, man. Life's filled with misery, and every day you wake up and there's a choice to be negative about everything that's in front of you, or there's a choice to just say, fuck it, I'm going to go after it and I'm going to do it. And I respect the shit out of people that do it. I just don't think that everyone on the population of Earth has that ability to do it. I think their fear factor.
I think they have the potential, but the fear is too big.
Yeah.
The fear is too big for a lot of people.
What's the biggest risk you've taken recently?
Well, recently it's starting a new company. Yeah. Starting over again is, it's starting from scratch. I haven't built a new startup in a long time. Everything is kind of...
What's risky about it though to you?
Well, the risk, I guess one risk is it doesn't work, and then it's like, okay, that's time that's been spent. It's not like I'm 22 and that time has been spent. I'm going to spin up another one. Like, I don't know how many more I would try. You obviously take risks with other things like your reputation, your energy, the impact it has on your family, all these kinds of things. So obviously didn't need to. We have a fund. It's awesome. I could have been doing that, but I felt compelled to build this company, or try to. And so it's a risk, like always, because I'm a startup now. I need to raise money, make it happen, make it work.
What is Era for people that don't know?
So Era, the fintech, is a fintech that's here to help Kiwis into their first homes faster.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the whole financial system and the way houses are bought or not bought, and I was looking for any different way that we could crack or unlock the system to help people buy their first home faster.
Yeah. And how are you going to do it?
Well, we've been looking at a lot of different ways. We've just been in a beta version at the moment with different ideas that we're working with some banks on that are not available yet. But the main strategy that we're ending up with is we're going to consolidate the whole experience that has currently been fragmented. So we're basically going to do everything from savings to buying the house.
Yeah.
And what we uncovered is that if all those different pieces in the middle, they have lots of different intermediaries. All those intermediaries take a lot of fees. And we're going to do it all in one experience.
Does that mean you have to be a neobank, or are you more of just a platform?
We're a savings platform, but we're going to have all the different licenses to do lending, insurance, and real estate.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a whole lot less fees. I'm going to give all those extra fees to the customers so they can get the deposits like twice as fast.
Yeah. You don't fuck around.
Well, when you see something that makes you mad, what we've realized is a lot of people could be buying a house right now.
Yeah.
There's a mindset thing. They might not know these things are available, but also there's a lot of money that goes out the door when you buy the house.
Yeah.
And it arguably is more than half the deposit you need.
Yeah. What do you say, like Leighton, for example, right? And I think you said that you listened to the Leighton episode. He was like, do you even really need to buy a house? You know, do you...
Yeah.
What do you say to those people?
So I've thought about that very long and hard. Obviously, I wouldn't start a company like this if I didn't think so. But I think buying a home is fundamentally important in a country that is so unstable. In New Zealand, which is the tenancy laws are so unstable, you could lose your house, your rental overnight. Whereas in most countries, you can stay in a rental your whole life. That's kind of one aspect. Gives people a sense of meaning, purpose, and a place to stand. The other aspect, which is the more rational aspect, is that I'm convinced it's the absolute best way for them to save, to not fritter away money, to grow a lot of equity, and to ensure that they have somewhere to live when they grow old and die.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that if you don't have a home, it's very good. You can live this kind of fire life or whatever you want for the next 10 or 15 years. And then at some point, you'll realize that house prices have tripled, and you haven't tripled, or you'd have to actually much more than triple the money you'd have saved, because the house price has tripled and you've had the benefit of leverage, which is the mortgage.
Yeah.
And you'll be unable to buy your own home, so you'll be a renter for the rest of your life. And I think that is an extremely scary prospect, especially in a country like New Zealand where superannuation and KiwiSaver, it will not cover enough.
Yeah.
So you would either have had to done an exceptional job in KiwiSaver, like an absolutely outstanding job, because you're not getting any benefit of leverage. All your income is getting taxed, whereas the house is moving untaxed. It will create a disaster. And that's the only reason really that was the thing that like compelled me, like if we don't do something different and a whole generation grows up without thinking it's possible to buy a house, there'll be a whole generation that cannot afford to retire with dignity and grace.
Yeah,
and that's why I want to build the company.
Well, I think it's almost the next generation that's going to be almost unaffordable to buy a house, right? It's like getting harder and bloody harder to buy houses.
Yeah, but not if, what we've unlocked, I think, is we can change it, for change people's minds around how that's possible. You just need to rethink what you're going after. And we reorganize the deck chair of the fee structure and how you get that deposit and fund it. So that's what we're doing. And part of it is, if you buy a brand new house, you need a much lower deposit, but most people don't really consider that. So we're going to help people understand why they should be buying brand new houses. You can get in much sooner. You do the whole thing with ERA from savings to purchase. We're going to give you like 20, 30K, if in terms of support to your deposit. You'll only need 20, 30K plus your KiwiSaver. We'd be giving you about 15 and you'd be there pretty fast. Yeah. So that's the transformation we want to see. Change the narrative from it's impossible to, if you do it this way, you can do it in 2 years.
Yeah, I'm an Aussie, right? And so like Aussies, you get a first home buyers grant, and then you get an extra grant if you build a new house. And so the whole market goes to building new houses and better quality houses. Like New Zealand houses are fucking
warmer, safer. Everything's brand new appliances. So we think that's one of the unlocks psychologically. Like, okay, first home should be a brand new home, and you use someone to do all of the things to help you do that. They don't need to take all that money from you.
Yeah. How do you recreate the culture of what you had? Like, how do you chase that dragon and do it again now this time?
That's one of the biggest questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm talking to my friends at the moment to get some ideas and, kind of almost mentoring me. Like I had, lunch with Connor from Tracksuit yesterday, had a coffee with Lisa from AF Drinks today.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been a ground up builder in New Zealand for a long time.
Yeah, man.
So that's what I got to get right now.
Do you feel the extra pressure? Because you're a well-known guy, right? And I've seen some great articles written about you. I've seen some shit written about you, right? Like, do you feel like almost like a public figure almost? And then when you're doing something again, the extra pressure of like, oh, fuck, I better get this right?
Only on myself. Yeah, I learned to not worry about the external stuff. It's not what's important to me unless it's going to detract or serve the mission.
How do you learn that? Because a lot of people are like, so Connor, man, for example, right? Like, man, like there's a lot of eyes on him at the moment, right? And he's super grounded, as you know, right? Lovely guy, just real grounded. And he's been through it, he's been to the States, but I think I met a lot of founders that almost like as soon as you do a capital round here, you're famous, like really quickly, and some become more and more famous and have more eyes on them. A lot of them, like they'll call me like upset. They're like worried about the pressure, and they're worried about like how do I handle it, and what do I do, and I don't read comments about me. I don't read anything. I'm just like, I'm doing what I do. I don't care. But it's hard to just tell someone that without.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I've been through the extreme version of public critical, under the microscope. So after that, like nothing, it teaches you a lot. But I think,
can we hit on that? Like, how did you? Because so we're talking about especially the CTO role that you applied for.
Yeah, I mean that's
right?
the only time I've ever really been under the microscope for every day for 6 weeks in a row.
Yeah. Did you have any idea that was coming?
Oh, of course not. Yeah. In terms of the media. Yeah. No, but I also was convinced that the government would step in and pull me out of it because that's their job. Like they're the ones that hired me and they're the ones that made the mistake.
Yeah.
And so if you're a kind government, you should stop letting someone be out there hanging out to dry when you're telling them they can't speak.
Was it a legitimate hiring process for you?
Oh my God, it was crazy. It was the most extreme hiring process. I think the final set of interviews and tests was over 10 hours.
I mean, disappointing that role didn't get filled, regardless, right? That if you or anyone else, right? Like, I feel like that was a great opportunity for New Zealand tech to really have a flag bearer in politics.
Yes, but I think New Zealand tech kind of only has itself to blame.
Yeah.
Because it tried to pull down the house of cards when it was already weak because of a minister doing something that was weak. And anyone with a bit more wisdom would have known that that's probably the better time to make it bolstered. Otherwise you lose. And anyone who knows anything about politics knows that once something is axed, it's like a dead fish. No one wants to touch it. And probably for another 10 or 15 years because it will always constantly bring back previous failures. So I think that in some ways it's like, well, you get what you deserve, because if you don't drive to support something that you've been asking for, even if you don't like particularly a particular outcome or whatever it might be, then who do you have to blame for the disappearance of it? Because the way I describe it is like the mafia. That role and all the different parts of it was chopped up into a million pieces, like all the different bones, and then distributed across like New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten Island, so that it was never spoken or seen of again because it had too much baggage that reflected on the incompetency of the administration of that government at that time. Yeah. So they would never want it to be visible. And
what was incompetent in your eyes that they threw you under the bus?
Oh, no. I mean, there were so many things incompetent, right? They didn't know at that time, that government had no idea what they were doing about almost anything. Yeah. And this role was a role that had been touted by both national and Labour, right? As Chief Technology Officer. I always understood it to be a strategy role, a vision role. And then you have the bowels of the tech ecosystem in New Zealand.
Right? You can't deliver.
Exactly. The bowels of the tech ecosystem in New Zealand saying, but that person's not a coder. He's not technical. He doesn't know how to make the websites better. And then the person has never read the job spec. They've never read the description of what the role is that the government's trying to hire. So you're kind of then like having this anger blow up with people that are not actually on the page. That, well, what is the point of this role? So
what was the role from you? Like why did you accept the role?
Oh, because I thought it was a potential to have a huge impact, positive impact on New Zealand. I believed naively that the government was committed to it. I believe that the 2 or 3 goals were admirable, which was a roadmap for technology, a roadmap for equity around technology, so technology equity access, and how the technology would drive sustainability in the economy. I thought those 3 things were pretty good ideas, and that a roadmap and a long-term vision and creating something somewhat outside of the government, which was what this role was meant to be, would be a good way to address it. So I thought, well, you don't have many opportunities like that. And the last time anyone had tried anything like this was Helen Clark, 2000, the knowledge wave, which was like, we need to be a knowledge economy, flag waving, speeches, and then nothing. Yeah. And so that's basically been it. That's the last time anyone's done anything with any vision around the future of New Zealand. Yeah. Knowledge wave economy, CTO gets scrapped, and then that's basically it.
So from my perspective, and what I heard about that process was, and to be honest, like I didn't really follow it, I'm going to be really honest, but all I heard was you were mates with Jacinda, you guys were having texts or something, or Messenger, Facebook Messenger, or something behind the scenes, or WhatsApp or whatever it was. I knew a bunch of the people that were they thought they were in the final process for. Like, I think I knew 4 out of the 5, whatever it was. And I think the NZ tech ecosystem thought that there was some backhandle things happening behind the scenes. That's obviously not the case from your perspective.
That is so ridiculous. That is so ridiculous. But it's also stupid. Like, that's not how jobs are appointed in New Zealand.
So, right? You'd hope so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't even know if there's any point in responding to that. But like, it was the most exhaustive, rigorous process.
How do you recover from that then, man? Like, after all that, like, how do you pick yourself up and go again? Like, because I personally, right, like, I'm pretty controversial online. I say what I want and I don't care, right? And like me or love me or hate me, I don't give a shit. And so I get a lot of shit from stuff that I say, but, you know, like, at that level, man, it's like, it must have affected you.
Oh, definitely, particularly my family, because we moved home, you know, literally the week that all happened. No, it was just mostly disappointing and aggravating that the government couldn't behave better to manage that process, like because I was basically left, you know, hung out to dry. So what do? Then you basically have to kind of go inwards, you know. So I basically just went under the radar for a few years and just focused on my own things and essentially not contribute, just go inwards and just work on your family and what's important to you.
Why did you come back to New Zealand?
Well, partly for that, you know, and partly to be closer to family and bring my son up here.
Yeah.
But it was all timing related to it. I was thinking of coming back. Someone told me they hadn't filled that role. I applied the second round. Looked like it was going to happen, so we kind of timed it.
Yeah. And then, so obviously you sat on a few bunch of boards. Like, that's where I sort of like saw you across the board. Did you feel that same impact from sitting on boards, or was it like getting back into startup now, like you're feeling it again?
I think on a board, your impact is at the beginning. If you're someone like me, which is you see things that others don't see, you kind of ask lots of different questions, challenging questions, because you're new, you don't know anything about the business. Maybe you don't even know anything about the industry. You have lots of external kind of ideas and stimuli. And then depending on the management, there's not much more you can do in terms of a transformation or an evolution. And then largely, you know, I think most boards in New Zealand are governance boards. And that basically means risk aversion. And that's not me. I'm not a governance person. So I think boards have been interesting. I would probably, if I found the right ones, I would try and do some more over time. But I found them really good. Yeah. But, I stepped down from Sky because it was quite some years and it wasn't, I think it was my time. Yeah.
Sky would have been a hard one, man, like trying to change a business, that's been going on one path for so many years to all of a sudden everything's changed.
Yeah, but I loved it. That's what I love, right? It's the punch in the face stuff. So it was staring down the barrel of death. Like, it's the first company in New Zealand to be attacked by the largest companies all around the world from overseas. It's like getting nuclear sent into the country. And no one really appreciated that, least of all the Commerce Commission, who decided that we couldn't merge with Vodafone, which is just entirely idiotic, and created a huge amount of shareholder destruction. But no one could see that this isn't about competition in New Zealand.
Yeah.
This is about this company being attacked by Netflix, Amazon, Google, YouTube, rightfully, because it's a global playing field. But that's the competition now.
Yeah.
And so the Commerce Commission is looking at like these local competitors, like, oh, if you do this and that, it's going to create less competition. There's more than enough competition. Like, there's several $1 trillion companies that are competing for these eyeballs. And as we now know, that's how it's distributed. So that was an extraordinary journey. And also just seeing how, a big company can respond or can't respond.
Yeah. Do you think it's easier, like thinking about your time earlier to now, is it easier or harder now to start a startup in New Zealand?
Well, it must be 1,000 times easier, no?
Why is it easier?
Well, first of all, from a software perspective, if you want to build anything, one man can build all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Particularly with AI. From a capital perspective, you have a decent idea and you're a good founder, you're going to find the money.
Yeah.
There's so many investors, not just in New Zealand, but all around the world. There's obviously talent. There's so many people now that know what a startup is and they want to join one, or they're willing to join one, or they've worked for one. So there's all these things that there's a huge support network. There's podcasts like these. Like there's so many things that were never there. So it must be the beginning of the golden age, right? Like we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
and the reason why I ask you that
easier.
is, do you feel proud in the moments that these people are living now that you helped create?
I played a small part. I love it. Yeah. I think it's great to see where it is and where it's going to go.
Yeah, because it's like interesting, like chatting with the Oxygen guys earlier, right? They do a lot repping the community, and so like there's a lot of people who have contributed to the success that New Zealand's seeing now, and like, you know, growth in SaaS in particular and tech and the likes, and we're literally knocking on the door now with, you know, the dairy industry to say that we're going to be the biggest exporter, and there's a lot of people who've been grinding for years. And then there's a lot of kids now, like starting up companies doing really, really well. And like, this fucking shit's easy. And I'm like, man, if you had been around a few years ago, dude, you know, like trying to raise money, you know, 15 years ago.
Well, it's great. I mean, if they think it's easy, that's awesome too, because it means they must be doing something great.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting.
What do you think? Like, so obviously you're deep tech, right? Something that obviously interests you to have a fun there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation now around have we gone too far with SaaS in New Zealand? Should we be doing DTF?
For me, I'm building a consumer startup in New Zealand, right? This fintech. Fintech, first time's fast, is like building a digital bank, a real estate company, a broker, all in one. It's very hard finding people who have built consumer products. So we've got like zero consumer chops.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the staff that you want to hire.
And people funding, like Will from the last episode, right? So they're doing Coupler, which is like a relationship app with Erica, his partner, and even just trying to get money, right?
Yeah, they don't get it because you don't get immediate. So it's very ironic because in deep tech you have these huge horizons. You give people a bunch of money, you don't really know what they're doing, and you just leave them to it.
Yeah.
And then 9 months later they tell you you've achieved one milestone, and then another 9 months they tell you you've achieved another one, and then you give them another huge bunch of money. Whereas in kind of consumer, it's like, where's the results? Like it's 9 a.m. And if you haven't made traction, or if you haven't, you know, the expectations are so different because of the experience body here is in these much more complex, longer term, physical infrastructure kind of deep tech stuff, or SaaS, which again is a product which you just keep building, and you slowly build a customer base. But I think it's awesome that we're now building a really good deep tech space, but I think broadening out of SaaS is pretty important. Yeah.
Like I'm from Wellington, obviously. Wellington's trying to position itself to be the scientific place in New Zealand. Like there's a lot of deep tech and there's a lot of scientific tech and there's a lot of like interesting R&D sort of popping up. And, you know, as someone that's probably seen every SaaS business, you know, possible over the last 15 years, I'm fascinated by some of the cool, you know, different takes that people are having on it now. And I think investors are looking for something different as well, rather than just another accounting, you know, plug-in or whatever it may be. And so
I think particularly a lot of the deep tech in New Zealand is trying to do something around sustainability or climate change, and that's obviously timely and, you know, that's a theme for the next 20 years, so that's good.
Who's the 22-year-old Derek now that you see that you're like, oh, like I just hope that they make it. I hope that they keep pushing along.
I mean, well, I think plenty of them have, right? Like I think the Rocket Labs guys are not 22, but those guys are just doing amazing. Obviously, Jamie Beaton's doing amazing. Like, you know, I don't know about the ones that I think, I hope they make it. But
how old's Jamie now, man? Like,
he's almost 30.
What he's achieved.
Let's not tell us secrets, but I think he's almost 30.
I loved it. Did that LinkedIn stuff that was happening a couple of weeks ago. It was like, like fucking.
The thing with Jamie, because I had lunch with him last month, I'm like, because of course he's not happy with what he's achieved. He thinks it needs to be 10x, right? Yeah. And that's because I'm guessing he's comparing himself with the absolute best. And I was reading today on my phone about Scale AI, which is founded by Andrew Wang, which I think he's 23 or 4 now or something. And yes, like a $12 billion valuation and, you know, $2 billion in revenue, 300 in EBIT, like, wow. Jamie's probably the kind of guy that compares himself to him, going, I'm doing shit.
Well, he's got like 14,000 degrees under his belt at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, shit, man. I mean, there's some bloody cool people in New Zealand doing some really cool things.
But, for example, he was constantly knocked for years and years. At the beginning, the first few years, it was actually not even believing there was anything.
I openly admitted, like, I thought it was a scam when I first started.
Yeah.
Like, and Penny, who joined him, right, she called me and she was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about joining Crimson. What do you think?" And I was like, "I don't get it. I think it's a scam," And it wasn't until that I like learned more about it, spoke to Penny, spoke to some other people, and I'm like, "Oh, I get it now." And but for me, just like the little bit of information I heard, I was like, selling kids the dream of potentially getting to an Ivy League from New Zealand. I don't get this, and fucking, I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong, and for people like that to do shit like that and prove people wrong, like, good on them.
Often it's just about the person. Like, an extraordinary person will make something extraordinary happen, and sometimes they're many steps ahead of you, so you don't really know what exactly they're doing or they want to do. And so if you don't get it, what they're telling you now, then it's because there's like other orders of magnitude that are not, they're behind the scenes kind of thing.
I have to admit that I get more excited by now, like at probably this year and the last year, if someone's explaining something to me and I don't get it, I get more excited because I can't see it, like I can't understand it, and so I want to learn more about if it's actually a problem that just not many people know about, like that this weird little thing.
Because I mean, if someone immediately gets it, there's something not non-obvious enough, right? And sometimes the idea, like the concept can be simply, oh, I get that, but how you achieve it is, well, you maybe don't need to get that, So what we're trying to do with Era, the fintech, is sound simple, like put it all under one roof through one super app, get people into their first homes, in half the time. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's do it. Okay, how do you do it? It's going to be a technically and commercially highly complex process, which nobody has ever done, particularly in this part of the world. We know of one company that's done it in the UK, and it will be up against multiple incumbent industries that are doing things in very bad, old-fashioned, and inefficient ways. And who's paying for that are the people trying to buy a first home. So the top-line story you can get, but then when you start peeling under the surface of things, you don't necessarily get, well, how is this going to come about? And that's where I think the founders' magic is. You kind of have to back founders and believe in them that they're going to find a way, because there's no technical way for them to know all the answers at this junction. Yeah. And it's the same when we back Dawn. We know conceptually what they're trying to do. We know conceptually that this type of space plane should be able to exist. But we then have to take a leap of faith.
Yeah. And the founders at Dawn are phenomenal, right?
Yeah. And those are the kind of people that they don't care what you think. They know what they know, and they're going to achieve it. And so you can't get swayed. And as an investor, most of the founders that have done extraordinarily well for us are those kind of founders. They do listen. They do want some guidance and some opinion, but they take it all in, and then they make their own decisions. Yeah. And that's their conviction is what makes the company. Yeah. And their alternate view of the universe. And that's what being a founder at its ultimate is. It's an alternate view of the universe. And when you look back at the early days of Jeff Bezos's little clips and stuff about the internet, schminternet, and he's just so many orders of magnitude ahead and beyond what people thought he was doing at that point, and no one would get it, but he knew in his head this is where this is going. I think that's you can't calculate and unpack that in the moment. You have to kind of take the faith that this person is a human worth betting on, and this space and this theme is worth betting on.
So when you close your eyes and think about Era FinTech, right, how big do you think it can be? Like, if you're, like you said 16 billion before with the AI company, right? Like, is that what you're going after?
No, I'm not competing with the Alexander Wangs of this world. To be honest, I don't have, that level of insane intelligence, or the Elon type of insane drive. Like, I have a balanced life, right? A kid, family, parents that I like to spend time with and take care of as they get old, those kind of things. But I want to build a patient, very, very large company. And I believe what we're doing is applicable across the whole of Asia Pacific. Yeah. And that's kind of what I have my view on.
What do you mean by patient?
Like that you can build a company over a generation. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not a company that you have a view on, selling in 5 or 10 years, because it's not a theme that's going away. People always need homes. They always need to be financed. They need to be bought. Yeah. So there is no time-boundness on this model. Yeah. This model could be an institution that lasts for hundreds of years if you build something that can do that. So the first few years are the most critical piece. And yeah, there's trillions of dollars worth of first homes being bought across the region. It's just about how you make it easier and faster for the next generations to buy them. So, but that's kind of the bigger possibilities. But day one is just, get one person at a time into a home in New Zealand, then in Australia, then Indonesia, wherever it takes us.
Yeah, nice, man, nice. I think we're pretty much near the end of the podcast now, man. So I've got a couple of questions for you. We have a guest from the previous episode ask you a question. Yeah, so Will on the podcast and I were talking a little bit about government at the time, and he wanted to know, what do you think that we could do as a country, as a government, to accelerate the tech sector? And I think the premise was around because he was talking about the cuts in government recently and the funding, some of the things that have stopped being funding. And so, pertinent question for you, man, like after that role.
So I haven't thought about this very much for a long time because I've been kind of just in my own world, right? And you obviously just shared this question with me. One of the challenges is we think that governments of the day can or want to solve these bigger issues, but the reality of the tech sector in New Zealand is it's not a vote winner. That's why it's on the blocks, and that's why it can be treated like a stepchild and just pushed around. And at any point, at any future government, if for some reason it's at risk or it's causing some issues politically, it will be axed, whatever's going on, right? That's the risk. So then what can we expect from government otherwise is a very difficult question, because you need someone who actually believes in it, has passion, and has a vision as to how they're going to change it, right? Mm-hmm. And that either has to be the Prime Minister or someone really, really senior. Yeah. And I'm not sure we've got, either of those. And then what would they or could they do in the first place? It's very difficult to know what they could do that could survive the next government. We've obviously seen this government has unwound a lot of the last governments. Yeah. So I think I'm not sure what the answer is, but whatever possible answers are there have to be things that somehow are not reversible. So one of the things that has been mentioned recently that is not reversible, that could have a massive impact, which is almost like a passive, compounding, slowly building impact, is mandating Kiwi savers to put some capital to private equity and giving them the ability to invest in venture and private equity. At the scale that KiwiSaver is at right now, it should have proportions of its funds into venture and private equity. And even if it's a small amount, because of the nature of that product or that category, it will just grow and grow and grow. Yeah. So if you do that, then maybe that could create supply, which would then create the ability to have the demand by either having a lot more people trying to build more ambitious companies. Maybe you'd have people coming here to build them because they know there's a much larger funding pool. That's one maybe systemic thing you could think about. What the Edmund Hillary Fellowship was trying to do, but I think got very broad and did not really focus on tech, it's more of a broader thing, is import amazing founders by the hundreds who want to live here and build companies. And I'm not sure how much of a red carpet you need to lay out for them, but some sort of program that just continues, that doesn't cost the government some money, because even EHF fellowships, they cost the government money to run or monitor or whatever. So if we have ability to increase supply of capital, if we have the ability to import really interesting people who want to build companies and startups, and maybe it's very that specific technology related, then you've got to leave the primordial ooze to do its thing. Like everything that the government has tried to do over the last 20 years, it hasn't really necessarily made any major difference. The only thing may be the VC co-invest, which I think a lot of people have a problem with, but it seems to me that it kickstarted some pretty interesting venture investors here, not least of which Peter Thiel, which kickstarted Xero. And yes, Peter Thiel made a lot of money out of that deal, but Xero created an ecosystem in Wellington. And there are other funds here that maybe wouldn't be here if that wasn't around. And as long as the government's making some commercial return on it, I don't see why that shouldn't continue, but not sure if these guys are going to continue it. So it needs to be stuff that's systemic and multi-government, because as we've seen, successive governments can easily move and tinker things and throw things out.
Is it the role of government, though, to build these things, or is it the role of the private economy, like ecosystem, to do it themselves?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So these things I've just mentioned are not really building, right? It's some is passive investing and some is giving allocations or mandating of the super funds. And I can see why that's tricky, because you want people to have a return. Obviously, you need people to have a super return, but there's enough evidence that they could also generate that return with some exposure to PE and venture. So is it the role? I think it's the role if a government is really committed and they see that as a key part of the vision of this country. I don't think I've seen any government since I've been an adult that believes that. They don't really believe that technology or the technology sector is a fundamental part of this half century's story in New Zealand. Yeah. And even if they did, I don't think they're in a position, or they haven't been so far, to put it all on the table, because there's too many votes elsewhere.
Yeah.
The votes are everywhere else. So you'd have to be some kind of visionary JFK type leader to say, we're going here and we're putting all these resources behind it. But the risks for those kind of politicians would be too high. And in New Zealand, where you just want to play down the middle, I don't know if it's going to happen. You look at countries like Singapore, which is where we set up our fund, they have a quasi, their structure has been very stable. They can plan very far ahead. They really commit for the long term. And that's how they've been able to create a super country, a super economy. And they make commitments. They say sustainability, climate, fintech hub of Asia. And it happens because they know in 5 or 10 years, the guy that shows up in 10 years is not going to undo all of that, because they've thought about it from the position of Singapore as a nation state and less about it as, am I going to get elected next time? And we are in a vortex of, am I going to get elected next time? And it consistently pushes us back as a country, because all these policies get canned or axed or thrown up and thrown down. And the only way to avoid that is to have some other second house in New Zealand, which has a longer view of the country, kind of like an upper and lower house. And, if we were to do something transformational in New Zealand, it would be to do something like that. So MMP was the last transformation in the early 90s. The next transformation would need to be something around, who are the people that are actually going to make the long-term decisions that cannot be unfucked or replaced or reversed? And can those decisions be made cross-party, bilaterally, by maybe wiser elders who are not in the fray of the day-to-day knife fight that politics has become? Because if you're in the day-to-day knife fight, you just can't help yourself from doing the thing that's going to get you that news or that boost. Yeah. And you're not supported to do the thing that is actually there for the long term. So long kind of answer, but I think it's a very troublesome space to try and, say, here's a quick fix.
I am, look, for what it's worth, I think I could have a whole podcast episode chatting about this, because I think it's a super interesting topic, right?
Yeah.
But I 100% agree with you, right? Like, I think it's never going to get achieved by a government coming in and coming out, right? Like, the only way is we have to have a long-term strategy. I don't think that strategy should be held by our central government or whatever it may be, because it will become politicized really quickly, right?
Yeah.
I was chatting with Judith the other night, and she was talking about space, and she was at a tech event, and I'm like, well, she's going to go where the market is, because they're fucking broke, right? And they need the money, and they're trying to hype everything up. And so, yeah, removing politics from it, would you think, like, that CTO role, if it ever came back, would you think it's a good decision? Do you still believe in it?
I think the most power in the role is to help shepherd a narrative. To hold a space that's meant to be non-political, to shepherd what narrative we can create as a country, and how can you have multiple parties on board? How can you create stuff that all people have to agree with? Or not have to, but they believe in? Like multiple people can find a way to believe in one or two things, and we can all do them together. Because anything in the day-to-day, even if someone believes in it in the pits of Wellington, it's their job to disagree with it. Which is what we found even in the CTO role. They both wanted a role, but the opportunity there was to take out ministers and score political points to destroy the role, despite that party believing, I'm talking about National, believing that the role should exist. Yeah. Those politicians know very well if they destroy the role in that context, in a political arena, like gladiators, that role isn't coming back for a generation, because of the damage that it's caused, and because of the... it's kind of like nuclear. I think of it as like nuclear, and it's taking centuries and millennia to cool off. So you have people that will just go and do this despite them knowing it's damaging the country in the long term. And how do we get out of that mess? I think we're getting worse and worse. It's getting worse and worse. It's getting harder and harder. So you need another podcast on this topic, and you can dive in it from multiple angles. But what I learned through that whole experience is also these people are humans, these people are politicians, and they're politicians first.
Yeah.
They are politicians first, and they're humans second.
I know a lot of ministers personally and professionally, and the drinks that I have with them personally, they are a different person, and and like a lot of their political views may even be different, right? Left leaning if they're right leaning if they're left leaning, and so I don't know. Like I would never want to get into politics. I think you did yourself a favour by not getting that role, mate, and you probably
well maybe, but that's what a lot of people say, but. I think if you have a platform and you've been asked to do something and you have a window, I don't know how long it'll last because I would not have been listening to anybody in terms of like I have to toe a party line, for example. You at least have an opportunity to try and set some questions and elevate some visibility on some bigger ideas or thoughts. Yeah. Now, without that platform, you get what you get, which is what we've got, which is basically 5 years of zero, right? So I would rather have the shot, whether it was me or someone else, to try and pioneer some thought than have a vacuum. And if, for example, this government doesn't really pick up the mantle, it'll be a 9 or 14-year vacuum, right? So the stakes are pretty high. And like we said, knowledge wave is 2000. That's a quarter century ago. That is a quarter century ago. It's the last time someone decided that this was important enough to put something out there. And I think by and large, the country and the ecosystem has done it itself. Got a few leg ups, but it's created the industry itself in spite of, what the government may or may not have tried to help with.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I think if the government builds things for the tech industry, they largely never build them that well, and so I think they should just support where they can, possibly around like tax, with superannuation, long term, like enabling us as an industry and getting the fuck out of the way and letting us build the ecosystem, right, and just make it easier.
Which is kind of like a venture capitalist's jobs too, right? It's like you invest, believe in people, invest in them, stay out of the way, be in the way if they need you.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to help technology and entrepreneurs kind of thrive. And there might be some infrastructure stuff the government should do, but I haven't really thought about those kind of things. And we'll talk about like settings to encourage innovation and creativity.
Well done, man. That was probably one of the hardest questions I've asked this season out of nowhere to like answer on the spot. So good job. That gives you now the ability to ask an equally as hard question, and so you can go whatever you like.
I know you told me that the next guest is a designer or a co-founder.
The next guest is Philip Furlinger, who is the co-founder and he was the original designer at Xero and now is a co-CEO of Upstock.
Right. Okay. So this question is last question was so macro. This question is super micro. So as a Xero user, I'm interested in how does he think organizations as they grow, well, to put it a different way, what I found is as organizations grow, the design experience and the consumer experience inevitably gets worse. Like to the point of when you look at Xero now, you think, is this product built this century? And the question to him is, why do you think that happens? Because you're a startup and then you become a scale up and then your design becomes terrible. And how might some of the scale ups now avoid that? Because it seems to be almost inevitable. As a company gets bigger and bigger and they start adding a bunch more features, they have a bunch of menus that didn't function and they don't do anything, and now they do something and the UI and the whole experience gets more and more terrible. I think often, at least in my personal experience, and definitely from Xero perspective.
Well, Xero is like beautiful like accounting software, right? It was.
That was the idea at the beginning, right?
Yeah, it was like.
So I'm not trying to shit on it. It still works and all that, but it definitely doesn't feel like it was built in the last decade. So how does that happen, and how can you avoid it for all the different SaaS companies that are zooming right now, and they're going to get big and they're going to keep adding features and they're going to have thousands more customers? What are some things they should be thinking about so they can avoid that pit of death?
Yeah, interesting question, man. Dude, thanks so much for your time. That was a really enjoyable chat. Really loved
Likewise.
it. Yeah. Hope to chat again in the future. And I'm really curious to see how this $16 billion startup idea of yours goes. Cheers for coming on, mate.
You're welcome.
I absolutely really love that podcast. I get to sit across people who give me their energy, give me their truth. Just don't prepare anything because I don't know what I'm going to ask them. I don't tell people what I'm going to ask them about on the podcast. Most of the time, I don't even look at my notes because I just get so caught up in chatting to super interesting people that I don't even I forget to look down. And so when I get to chat to someone like Derek, who's got a lot of interesting stories, a lot of things that he's done, there's not enough time. And to get someone that's just so forthcoming with their thoughts and feelings and experiences and sending information back to us is phenomenal. And so thank you so much for coming on, Derek. That was a real joy. It's great to just chat to someone who has their reckons, who's passionate about certain topics. There's going to be some moments in there that I think people will really enjoy listening to. There's going to be some great moments in there that I think you'll learn from and get to hear from some of the OGs of this industry that we're living in now, right? And so definitely hat tip to people like Derek that come on and share this information with us. And I hope you're really enjoying it. I hope you're down there subscribing right now, following us on whatever platform you are, because you're the reason why we're doing this podcast, and you can help us by making this bigger and better and sharing it with your friends. Comment below what your favorite moment on this podcast was, because there were so many juicy topics. Let me know, tag me below or tag Derek below, and let us know what your favorite moment was. Until next time, I'm Troy Hammond. Next episode is the last of the season, and so I will see you for that because it's going to be a banger.
This podcast is produced by John O'Tucker from Empire Films.